Okay, then let's make starts. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when people are watching this. And welcome to our session on Delivering Census 2021 outputs. My name is Callum Foster. I work at ONS. I'm the business lead on outputs and dissemination. And in this session, I'll be joined by a number of colleagues, Keith Spicer, Ed Morgan, and Rob Fry, who will introduce themselves as we progress. So the idea was to have questions at the end using Slido. You'll see there's a code there and a website to visit and a code 12312. So anyone who is joining us in real time, very much welcome your questions. Otherwise, we'll try and have a bit of discussion amongst ourselves at the end anyway. Last thing in terms of housekeeping, anyone who is watching in real time, please keep your microphones and cameras turned off. So what I'll do is press on in terms of a bit of an introduction, and this gives an introduction that provides a bit of context to all three presentations. So just as I said, a bit of scene setting. So we just run a census. Hopefully people are aware of that. Ideally, you would have responded. I'm sure most, if not all of you, will have. That was from ONS, responsible for running the census in England and Wales. Northern Ireland also ran their census in March. The signs are that it's worked pretty well. So the data collection operation really does seem to have gone well. We've exceeded our targets. The 94% target of overall response has been exceeded, as has the separate targets around minimizing the amount of variation between areas, which is really important to make sure it's a kind of a valid and robust and representative estimate that we come out with at the end. So focus now is turning from the data collection exercise onto the outputs. And that includes not only the numbers, the data, but the analysis and the interactive products that we provide to users. So we've got a number of ideas and innovations planned about how we can make the best use of that data, which we want to show in this session today. So, perhaps goes without saying, census is really important, counts everyone in England and Wales, really important that it's inclusive of all aspects of society and gets the full representation of the characteristics of the population. And, the cost and effort of taking that census is only worthwhile when the results are provided to users in a way that allow them to use that information to improve the decisions they make. So a lot of emphasis in the census around being inclusive, making sure we get responses from all aspects of society, and the same goes in terms of the outputs, in terms of their reviews for all aspects of society and very different sorts of uses and users within that. So it's almost kind of an endless list of possibilities in the way in which census data can be used and the types of products that have been created. So we've got, it's a great place to be, if you like, in terms of the opportunity of what could be done. But in terms of scaling that into kind of practicalities of what we actually do, we need to make sure that we consider that wide range of users and their needs, and to create a range of different products that make access to the data, as I said before, as accessible and inclusive as possible. For some people, that they love kind of looking at going through the numbers in detail and doing deep analysis. For others, it'll be much more about presented data, insights, interactives, and so on. So thinking about that range of products for different users, and we'll see us touching on that today. So in terms of the agenda, myself and Keith Spicer are going to talk through some of the innovations around data dissemination, then moving on to Ed, who's going to talk about the proposals around census analysis, and then on to Rob, who will talk about some of the data visualizations and interactives that we're considering. So if we move on to that first session, so I'll start off, then I'll hand over to Keith, then back to me. Touched on this already a little bit in terms of the users and the uses of census data are almost endless, and there's users and their needs come in all shapes and sizes. From this picture, I think the purple chap in his speedos and armbands is probably my favourite, but you can see the sense that a real wide range of users. And in the past, we tried to meet as many of those user needs as we can in what we've defined as a set of standard tables or outputs that are produced. But in terms of coming up with that single set has had some drawbacks. So the first of those around, the kind of theory that one size doesn't really fit all, is that, the characteristics of the population vary dramatically, really, by geography. So it's not an even, if you like, dispersion, if you like, of the characteristics of the population. So some areas, the population are very different to other areas. So from a producing statistics point of view, what might be considered disclosive, and Keith will talk more about this by what we mean by that, in one area, because of the characteristics of the population, something may be seen as potentially disclosive in one area, in another area it wouldn't, even if those areas are of a similar size. So in order to kind of minimize that risk of disclosure, we need to be quite cautious on the level of data that we provided in those standard outputs. So that's meant that some areas where potentially we could have provided more detail, we haven't been able to, because we've created the same output that's made available for the same type of area within different kind of geographical areas. So the example we always kind of trot out for this is around data that we might produce on ethnic diversity. Some areas such as central London are much more ethnically diverse than others, perhaps Cornwall. But we've had to create a table or a number of tables that relate to ethnicity that work equally well in Cornwall and London. And we've had to err on the side of caution in terms of making sure we don't disclose information about individuals in Cornwall. So that's meant that perhaps we haven't provided as much detail and information that we could have for some of those areas where there were greater levels of ethnic diversity. So that's one aspect. Another is that users' needs and the users themselves, that they'll have different needs and different wants from those outputs. So sometimes that's because they're coming at things from a topic perspective. Some people will be coming at it from an education or a health focus, and obviously want everything about those aspects. Others, might be working in a similar role, let's say a kind of local authority role, carrying out kind of statistics research, but the aspects of the population and the needs of the population in that area might be quite different. For some areas, it might be more around an aging population. Others, it might be more around, inequalities and so on, or employment. So what users want can be very different for a number of reasons. And the ability to create a manageable standard set of tables which balances all of those has been really quite awkward. And it's been something of a compromise to kind of hit as many but not all needs as possible. And arguably, in the past, sometimes it's taken too long to make the data available. There's good reasons why census estimates don't come out immediately after collection, which we won't go into now. But even taking that into account, the process of carrying out the really important check that we minimise the risk of disclosing information about individuals, has in the past extended the timeline it's taken to produce some output. So we've had to come up with some table outlines. When we get the data, run them through those table outlines, review them, sometimes change them. And so sometimes it resulted in delays from what we promised, and also some changes that users weren't expecting in terms of the design of those outputs. So what we're looking really for is, obviously we know that the quicker that we can produce the outputs, the better it is. The more timely that information is, the better quality it is, and can be used to make more effective decisions, therefore more helpful to users, and ultimately happier. So what we've been looking at is a more flexible dissemination approach that's got what we refer to as automated disclosure control methods at its heart. So this is a point I'd like to introduce my colleague Keith Spicer, who's going to talk through the methods and the science, if you like, behind this. Over to you, Keith.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm Keith Spicer, head of the SDC, Statistical Disclosure Control team in Methodology and ONS. We've been working for some time on the disclosure methods for 2021 census. The whole point of SDC is to protect the confidential information on individual respondents. We have to do this by law. Under the Statistics Registration Service Act, we must protect personal information. There is a risk that the identity of an individual can be deduced from tables that are produced together with other published information. So the SDC methods reduce that risk, and we do take into account the utility of data as well as the risk. We'll never reduce the risk to zero, but we reduce it to a very low level. One innovation for 2021 is the flexible table builder, which Callum alluded to, and it will allow users to choose the variables and build their own tables. And in the past, we've done disclosure control on standard tables, and then wasted the data come in, and sometimes taken a lot of time to assess those tables. And sometimes the tables that come out aren't the ones that we originally intended. So this will allow users, because it allows users to choose their own variables, be flexible, obviously be timely, because the disclosure control will be automated and instant, and accessible. So having a table builder introduces one or two particular risks, and particularly on repeated requests. And one of these is where the classifications could be such that one could get a table for example, age 16 plus, and the same table for age 18 plus, and then subtract one from the other, and you get a table for age 16 to 17, which might be very sparse, and allow individuals to be identified and find out something about them. And the particular risk, the other risk repeated requests, is for reconstructing records. If you've only got one person of a particular type, then you can, for this example, one widowed person, you can just tabulate marital status against each and every other variable in turn, and then just build up an individual record. So we need to protect against that. And we have three different types of protection. Record swapping, which we've done in the past censuses. And this protects persons and households with unique or very unusual characteristics. Those are people that might be quite identifiable as sort of local characters, or people who just are quite different to the rest of the local population. And so we do targeted record swapping to swap those households. The risk of disclosure by differencing is protected by adding noise to tables and cell key perturbation, and then there are disclosure checks so that the very sparse tables that could allow identification. So if somebody selected 5 or 6, 7 variables at low geography, you might get lots of noughts and ones, and be very easy to construct the individual records, and also to find out things about the individuals. So briefly, record swapping, we take the unusual individuals and households, we target them, and then we swap the households with others. We do match on household size as a minimum. So if I have a 4-person household that has got 1 or 2 unusual people, we would, if we have to swap that, we would swap with another household in another area of size 4. We'll also match on other key variables such as age, sex, and where we can, ethnic group, economic activity, but that's household size as a minimum. The swap rate is will be similar to 2011, and is the main protection for 2021 outputs. The second method, which happens after the tables have been, or draft tables have been produced, is cell key perturbation. I'm not going to go through the example. I'd probably take my whole 10-15 minutes to do that, but it allows controlled noise to be assigned, and so you get the same level of noise on a particular cell if it appears in the same table, different tables. If the same table was produced with variables in different order, you will get the same perturbation. So there is consistency within the same cell in different tables. Okay, it is a light touch. It's protecting against differencing and reconstruction attacks, because trying to reconstruct records, if you're not quite sure whether the numbers are quite right, then it's quite difficult to then reconstruct the records. And this is a method which is absolutely essential for any table builder. You have to add noise. Record swapping would not do this job alone. And the third method is the disclosure checks, and these address sparsity and any remaining disclosures. But a real key for this is to allow tables to pass in those areas where the disclosure risk is sufficiently low. And Callum talked about this, and we've termed it the patchwork approach as opposed to a blanket approach. And I'll just explain that in a bit more depth. So in the past, if we have a table for 6 areas, we would look at the 6 areas and area A, B, C, and D. The tables look fine, no disclosure risks, but areas E and F seem to have some quite considerable disclosure risk, and there was too much risk to share that. So in 2011, the blanket coverage approach, none of that data would be shared. In the 2021 patchwork approach, we could share the data for the areas that were fine, A, B, C, and D, and it might well be possible for users to request slightly less detail for the areas E and F to get the data for those other 2 areas as well. So it does allow far more data to be output and produced. So as a summary, a very quick summary, we have to do SDC. We're not doing it just for a laugh. We have to do it by law. We have to protect confidentiality of individual response. It says so on the front of the census form, as well as in legislation. This time, we're allowing flexible outputs from a table builder. It's a fantastic step forward, and particularly using the patchwork approach. And the 3 types of protection, we're not just doing three instead of 1. They are protecting different risks: the record swapping, the unusual people in households, the cell key perturbation for differencing, which is very specific to a table builder solution, and then disclosure checks just to protect against any residual risks and sparsity. So I think that should bring me back to Callum.
So yeah, hopefully I'm showing my screen back again. So what I'm going to do now is just complete this part of the session with bringing what Keith's talked about to life a little bit. So from a technology point of view, what we've obviously been trying to do is to build something that can work quickly enough to enable users to kind of get the feedback from the results of the disclosure rules and checks that Keith was referring to guide them in their data selection. And we'll be working with an external company, Sensible Co company, on a product, and I'll show some of the demonstrations from that. So just showing it in sort of picture form, if you like, before I kind of show it working in practice, just so you're really clear what's happening. We build what we refer to, or plan to build what we refer to as a flexible data set, and those flexible data sets will be as much data as we can make available on a particular population base. So we want to avoid people trying to, join together or making themselves confused, if you like, between household information and people information in terms of one counting households, one counting people. So you'll see in a moment that we kind of build what we refer to as flexible data sets, which are based around population bases. So we build that thing, and then ultimately what we want to provide is the external user an interface by which they can query that and kind of build their own tables, flexibly in the way that Keith described. So make selections, it comes into the tool as a query. And then what the tool is doing is actually working on a subset of the unit record data. So it hasn't got names, addresses or anything like that, but it is kind of line by line, person and household, and taking that query and aggregating that, tabulating that into tables, which then within the tool carries out some of Keith's methods in terms of that small cell key perturbation to add that noise to protect from kind of differencing and reconstruction attacks, and then assessing the aggregated table which has had the perturbation applied against that set of disclosure checks that Keith referred to. So in this case, 3 areas or 3 tables have been requested for different areas, and 2 passed and 1 fell. And then, really importantly, feeding that back to the user so they get to see the kind of result of their query. So I'll quickly show a working prototype of this. So just to be really clear, this is working on a set of synthetic data of roughly the right sort of size. What you'll see is a user interface. It's been developed to demonstrate the back end workings rather than it necessarily being what a user will use. So we're working, within the organization to work out what the front end would look like, but this is kind of demonstrate the working of it. So if we go and kind of create our own outputs in the way in which we described, we make a choice. A little slow, so we have to choose one of those flexible data sets. So I'm going to choose just ones that's about people, usual residents, and then similar to other data explorers, we choose a geography. So I'm going to choose quite a small geography, lower layer, super output areas. So they're quite small in size, not the smallest, but there's around just under 35,000 of them in England and Wales. And then I'll make it easy, so I'll just get data for all of them in England and Wales, so all 34,753. And then we're into the interesting bit. So the bit I described in terms of that circular flow of taking a request, building the table, carrying out the methods, carrying out the checks, and feeding it back to the user. That's now happening every time I press a button. So what you'll see is if I select a variable and say, okay, I'm going to select some age, 6 categories, defined as these. That's sort of what I want for my task. It's probably just outside I was shot. It has created those tables for each of the nearly 35,000 areas, and they all pass. So that's all good. So as a user, I can say, okay, that's good. I'll now add my next variable. So for what I'm doing, I want some information on economic activity. Again, perhaps I want the 6 categories. So I'm still doing okay, but I've actually hit for a small number of areas a point where we're not prepared to provide those tables because we think it's potentially disclosive. So we suppressed a small number of those areas, but I'm still getting most of the information. So I'll continue because I also want to know about health. I want to look at the interrelationships between those things. So there again, I've lost a bit more, but that's still useful information to me. What I might try and do is just tease it a little bit, and perhaps if I added a bit more age detail for a particular reason, I might try and look for that. That's taken me too far over the edge in terms of how much information I have. Likewise, I might be interested in more economic group activity. Put to the 13. Oh, that's quite drastic. That's becoming very disclosive. So I'll probably settle on perhaps that level of information that I requested there, and I can take that. So I can save that. And you can see that data has been created. Might take a little time here, but I can quickly view some of it. You can see quite a few zeros, other numbers, and so on. There's a huge amount of data there, and a few thousand. It sounds a lot, but out of 35,000 areas have failed those disclosure control rules, and so the data is not available. But I'd probably want to take that data away and then work out how I can get that higher level of information that Keith described. So I can go up a geography and get more information. So what I do here probably is say, actually, okay, if I went up to the middle layer super output area, what I get? So in this case, I'm back up to 99%. That's good. I'll probably take that, get that information. Still haven't got complete coverage. So I've got a choice then. I could play around my variables again, perhaps, or I might actually say in terms of geographical level, just to get the complete coverage, if I go up to local authority level, in this case, for every area. So as a user, I'm sort of prodding and probing, if you like, to get and squeeze as much data as we're prepared to give out of the system. So it's kind of that patchwork, as Keith described, approach. So I'll just put back to the slides, just to finish off really in terms of this part of the presentation. Sorry, actually no, apologies. I'll just go back slightly and show something else. So we talked about flexible there. The other aspect is the referred to kind of standard tables and so on from previous censuses. So we've got a concept this time of ready-made tables. So what the idea here is, if I was interested in economic activity, we've got a set of what we refer to as ready-made tables. That looks like the sort of thing I might want. I can just go straight into it. And we've done the work ahead of time to make sure that these tables will be available for each and every area that they're made available for, in this case, output area. So I can, as a user, I've got a full set of data that I can play around with, compare areas, all that kind of stuff. That's the blanket coverage. So just going back to I think it's the last slide to just finish that off. It's really, this innovation of flexibility, I think, is really important and really powerful and should be really useful to users. as I said, what we're doing is putting it alongside a concept of ready-made tables. So ready-made tables will provide data that's comparable across all areas. It will support comparability to 2011 outputs because the tables we created are similar to those. But they've got the same characteristics, if you like, of previous data, where for some areas you're not getting all you could do as a user, but it gives blanket coverage. What we've shown today and focused on particularly is that flexibility. So what we've shown here is the ability for users to build their own tables. Alongside that, we'll also provide some capability for users to start with a ready-made table and expand it out and kind of flex it. But these provide the flexibility for users to make their own outputs, to really, as I said, dig and probe in terms of how much data they can get out. But it results in a patchwork coverage. So the data is deciding, if you like, how much detail you can have for a particular request in a particular area. So hopefully that's been useful. That's the end of that part of the session. So thank you for listening. We'll take any questions at the end and remind people of the Slido code there, 12312, for any questions.
Brilliant, thanks. So hi everyone, good afternoon. My name's Edward Morgan. I'm the lead for Census Analysis Coordination here at the ONS. My team and I have been working together to pull together a really comprehensive analytical program based on census to give us the most up-to-date insight on the population and provide the strongest evidence we can to support policy decisions. We take a pretty strong strategic approach when we do our work, and we're guided by a particular aim here, which is to deliver a really comprehensive suite of outputs analysis products based on the census that meets the needs of our stakeholders, so people like yourself, and really achieves significant public and policy impact. So, we're very keen for our statistics to really start those conversations about public policy in this country. Our approach is aligned with the UK Statistics Authority strategy, Statistics for the Public Good, and we follow these 4 pillars when we do our work. So our first is ambitious. We're very keen to shine a light on all areas of society across all topics and all sort of phenomena we can think of. Secondly, we try to be as inclusive as possible, and so we produce statistics on every subpopulation we can possibly dream of, and we're very keen for anyone who engages with our outputs or analysis to be able to see themselves in the data, no matter who they are or where they come from. Thirdly, we want our statistics to be radical, and we're very keen for particularly our analysis program to produce a really coherent story of the population across multiple publications. So it really feels like you're kind of on a journey with our data rather than just churning out random ad hoc articles that have little to do with each other. And lastly, we work to be sustainable as well, and in this case it means producing census analysis which has been developed and prioritized by really well understood user needs. So it's about talking to users like yourselves to really understand what you want to see in analysis and make sure we can deliver on those, so that our program of analysis has real longevity for many years to come.
Ed, sorry to interrupt. Yep. Ed. Your slides aren't moving on and they're not full screen. I don't know whether.
Ooh. Okay, that's a shame because they're full screen of mine. I can try resharing again.
Try that, or do you want me to share your slides and do it that way, or?
I'll reshare them again now.
Yeah.
If it's clearly not working, then we'll
that's it.
Try ourselves. That's
perfect. Cheers.
Also you. Okay, great. So compared to 2011, the census analysis program was really targeted at the high-level expert user, technical policy users, and this time around we're very keen to broaden that sort of audience base much more. Of course, our expert users are very important to us, but we really want to cover that broad range of user personas this time around, so we get that real high-level engagement across the public. In 2011, our census analysis program covered about 5 broad topic areas, and This time round, we've increased it to be much more ambitious. So we want to look at 12 particular topic areas, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And lastly, our proposed analysis program is made up of 162 products as it stands, and we aim to start publishing this from autumn 22 onwards. So we have new questions for 2021. We have sexual orientation, gender identity, armed forces veterans, new qualification types, new central heating categories, as well as amendments to the ethnic group question. And this really increases our scope of what we are able to deliver from an analytical perspective, and will give an even higher richness to the sort of analysis we're able to do and the sort of policy questions we're able to answer. So this is the list of analytical topics that we're doing based on the 21 census. So I won't go through all of them, but we've got some newer topics in there. So things like ageing, equalities, sexual orientation, of course, this time around, veterans, as well as our sort of traditional topics like demography and housing and health and labour market and so on. Particular bias perhaps this time around towards topics such as health, primarily because of the events of the last 18 months or so. But we feel we've got a really good range of topics this time around to do some work on. So how have we developed our program then? So we've taken into account of three things primarily. First is the census white paper, which was published in December of 2018, which really set the sort of guidelines of what we want to deliver. And in terms of analysis, we have specific sets of subpopulations which we aim to produce analysis for, as well as another key aspects to integrate into our program. Secondly, we've been driven by the sort of key policy questions of the day, and particularly user needs through stakeholder engagement events such as the one we're having now. And lastly, we're very attentive to the various innovations that have been made, particularly in the world of data linkage, statistical methodology much more generally, good practice in data viz and journalism as well. And all of this has sort of influenced how we think about developing an analytical program and how we deliver that. So what is our proposed release schedule looking like? And it follows one key principle primarily, which is that at the very top, at the very beginning, in the early phases of dissemination, we start with the sort of most simple statistic as you possibly can formulate, which of course census day population of England and Wales. And then as we go through the series of publications, we aim to sort of gradually become more and more complex. So we'll go on to do a sort of age sex breakdown, univariate summaries, multivariates, and until we get to the sort of the very end of the analytical program, where we release data on sort of longitudinal and linked data. So the first thing to notice, our release window for the main census outputs is 1 year, between March 22 and March 23. In the 2011 census, this release window was stretched out to about 3 years, so we're really aiming to condense it for census 21 outputs and keep the information as timely and as current as possible. We're of course planning on dividing this 1 year window into 3 different phases. So our first phase includes summary statistics of univariate data and first release type information, allowing us to get the main characteristics out there as soon as we can. Phase 2 moves us into a much richer sort of multivariate data, including cross-tabulated data and much more complex analysis for the usual resident population. And then phase 3 will see the release of outputs for alternative population bases, like the workday out of term time populations, small population data, origin destination data, for example, and microdata samples of anonymized records as well to go along with that. And then after the main release window, so from March 23, we'll begin focusing on UK data and linked data analysis as well. So looking at phase 1 then, the first 2 boxes on the right represent the first to initial findings type releases. So at the moment, the proposal is for very summary initial census findings release of rounded national population estimates, followed by local authority estimates by sex and age, and we'll be looking to produce that second release unrounded. Then we move on to what we refer to as the topic summaries. So for those who have used 2011 census outputs, these will be very similar to 2011 quick statistics. These will generally be on single variables, but we will be able to produce a lot of detail about each variable this time around. The area profiles that will accompany them are akin, but not exactly the same as the 2011 key statistics. So they are aimed at enabling people to understand a particular area, make comparisons across different areas, and to a certain extent as well, possibly comparisons over time. Lastly, then, the topic summaries won't just include the data themselves, but a package of data, commentary around that data with some very sort of high-level analysis and data visualization products to go alongside. And we're proposing to stagger these releases probably fortnightly, so not pushing it all out at once. And we feel this helps tell a much better story about each topic area as it's released. Even with the sort of staggered release, the release window for these topic summaries is much more condensed than from 2011. The next phase then contains the release of the multivariate data based on the usual resident population that is most unique, and this is the thing that's most unique about the census. So the size of the ready-made and build your own tables box doesn't quite represent the amount of data we will release. So we are talking about billions of counts of information that will be made available. And it's that kind of richness you get from cross-classifying variables against each other and being able to see those relationships between health and employment or education or attainment or health, age, sex or provision of care, whatever it is. You can really get those insights that you generally can't get from other data sources as reliably and for really small geographies as well. So comparing that to 2011, it is the sort of data that was made available in the local characteristics, in detail characteristics release. Alongside that, in both phases 2 and phase 3, we also plan to provide much more detailed analytical insights, so exploring specific subpopulations and really engaging with those particular policy areas of interest. And then moving into phase 3, we'll be releasing our other products around alternative population bases, small population tables, origin destination data, and microdata as well. Very lastly then, not shown on picture but shown in the text, is our commission table service in phase 3. So if a user needs a table not provided in the standard offerings and is something that we can produce from census data while maintaining confidentiality of responses, there is an option for users to commission that table from us. We expect the nature of some of those commissions to be different this time round because users will have access to more data through our new build your own table products. And then lastly, going back to our release schedule and looking at what takes place beyond March 23. So the main thing here is that there are UK outputs. So most of us here will be aware that our colleagues in NRS took a decision to move their census until March 22. So we have to wait for results of that before we can build the UK outputs. And we expect this to happen after March 23. And alongside that, we will be continuing developing our much more complex and sophisticated analysis using longitudinal and linked data as well. So that brings us on to you and your sort of thoughts about this then. Very pleased to say we're hosting a public consultation at the moment outlining our proposals for releases of census outputs and analysis. And our consultation is divided into 6 different sections. So the first is the shape of our outputs and release schedule. Number 2 is the sort of main changes to variables compared to the 2011 census. Thirdly, proposals for new derived variables. Fourthly, the various population-based specifications. Fifthly, we're very interested in your feedback about how we are sort of taking a census during a period of dramatic change, particularly regarding things like Brexit and the coronavirus pandemic. And lastly, paradata as well, so information about how we collect the census data. We've also published our full list of census analysis proposals as well, so you can find them in the link there. And all the responses to the consultation will be analysed and used to inform our sort of final products suite of outputs and analytical plans, and we will publish them in February of next year. And we really welcome your feedback in either personal or professional capacity, and you can find the link to our consultation on your screen there, and it will remain open until the 5th of October. So where do we go from here then? So the consultation closes next month, and we'll publish a prospectus of outputs analysis in February of next year. Beyond then, in spring 22, we expect to publish our first release of initial census findings, and then by the autumn of next year, we really hope to get into the sort of nitty-gritty of census analysis then, and we will start our publication schedule of analytical reports, tables, maps, and briefings as well. So to summarise then, it's going to be a really long-term but exciting analytical programme covering 12 topics across 162 articles. Alongside it, as Rob will describe in a moment, there will be some really exciting and innovative digital content products which will really help bring some of these numbers to life. There's of course Consultation, which is live at the moment, so please do take part and let us know your thoughts about our analytical programme. And lastly, this is something we're really excited and really proud of, and really looking forward to telling the story of the UK's population. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end of the remaining talks. So thank you.
My name's Rob. I head up our data viz team and graphic design teams at ONS. Actually, wider than that, I co-lead a digital content team. So that's data visualization specialists, data journalists, designers, social media specialists. And yeah, I think it goes much wider than just data visualization, actually. So it's about harnessing that power of digital formats. And as kind of Callum was saying earlier, kind of creating that broad range of content that is open, accessible, useful, engaging for a wide variety of users. Lots and lots of data and lots of analysis that Ed and Callum and Keith have just outlined. We've been looking at how we can make the most of it through this range of outputs, and in particular, I think kind of looking to the strengths of census data. We know that we have data that is down to very, very small areas, down to kind of output area level, and through kind of fantastic innovations like Flexible Table Builder or the Build Your Own Tables product, we have data for combinations of variables that perhaps we wouldn't have had before. So aim to use this talk to kind of show and explain some of the thinking behind a range of the prototypes that we're developing in this space. Again, kind of reinforcing kind of the points that Callum was making earlier, we have a wide set of personas that we are looking to cater for through our census outputs. And we've been working hard to understand the needs of those users. Don't expect you to read the detail on this slide. It's far too small, but an illustration of just one kind of very small section of how we've captured those needs across those personas. We know that we know through this that not everyone is comfortable using data and spreadsheets or GIS packages, and so how can we help create content that makes it easy for people to engage with? Very high level, I think it's kind of led to a set of products and formats that fall into one or two camps. On the left-hand side of things, it's probably the more expert users that are really after that data, or kind of interfaces that help them explore the data more easily. Towards the right-hand side of the spectrum, more towards the general public side of things, it's very much about summarizing some of those key findings, helping people extract insight from that data in an easier way as possible. Not so much motivation to explore the data themselves, or to kind of get their hands dirty with spreadsheets. So kind of very high level, we've been there's a range of exploratory products that are being developed. It might be that we, I should say before we kind of go through any of these in any detail, it might be that we don't end up developing all of these, and very definitely they're all at a very kind of prototype stage at the moment, so they're very likely to change. It's just as much about kind of exploring the technology that sits behind this, the kind of the APIs, the systems like the build your own tables that kind of enable some of this, and just work out what is possible in this kind of digital age. And we're seeking feedback throughout. So as we develop these prototypes, we'll be kind of user testing them and getting feedback, and socializing some of the products that we are prototyping. So this session is just one way of gathering feedback on what we're putting together. But you can kind of see the kind of build your own table products at the very left hand side of this slide. That's kind of what Callum and Keith have already spoken about. We like to complement that with this concept of an area profile that Ed kind of touched on earlier, again kind of providing information about a single area and perhaps some kind of basic comparisons. The idea that we might kind of allow people to make their own profiles, that perhaps what we decide to be kind of the generic offering for a particular area may not be what a particular user is interested in. So the idea that people could begin to piece together some variables that they are interested in, and provide some a link that could be shareable with others that they could then sort of take away and reuse themselves. Also in this explanatory format space, got this concept of a draw your own geography, which I'll go into a bit more detail later. An atlas, kind of letting people explore those spatial patterns and comparing areas, and a subpopulation explorer. This really harnesses the power of the flexible table builder solution and kind of lets people drill down to kind of see how particular subgroups compare and where they're kind of distributed spatially across the country. And a range of explanatory formats as well. So sort of in particular looking to kind of harness the power of census data. We know there's such low levels of geography available through this. We know through our user research that people are interested in narratives about their area. So finding formats that help expose that those dimensions. So this concept of robo-journalism, or kind of automated narratives, and storytelling, where we kind of help guide people through complicated concepts and in a more visual way. So we've got more prototypes than I'll be able to demonstrate today in the time available, but these slides are available, I think, in the chat window, and probably through other means after this talk as well. And there are a range of links that you can kind of click into and have them explore yourself. I'll just touch on a few of these prototypes today. Hopefully you can still see my screen. First, which I wanted to show you was the Census Atlas, which was a way of letting people explore the spatial patterns in the wide range of census data that we have. So you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen here that there is a selection menu that kind of lets you navigate the wide range of census variables. You can kind of select each of these, and you can see that the map updates, the data goes down to kind of LSOA level. In this particular example, we're exploring whether we can take that down even further down to output area level. Key things here are that yeah, it kind of allows you to kind of spot those spatial patterns and make quick comparisons and see how kind of cities like London or any other area across the country, how they compare to kind of neighbourhoods around you. Very much trying to tap into that personal or area-based kind of focus that many of our users have. This isn't all the functionality that we hope to have it's very much a prototype as well as it currently stands. So hoping to kind of allow some comparison between the 2021 census and 2011 census as well. As we'll see, this is kind of a launch point for analysts as well, where there'll be functionality that we can add to this in time, where they can kind of, a user can pick a particular variable of interest, even a particular area of interest, and generate either a static image that they can then use in their own analysis or in their own report, or offer up some embed functionality so that people can embed a more interactive experience in their own work. We've seen this work really well in the past across other ONS outputs, and we can get kind of quite wide media uptake and academic uptake through interfaces like this. The next prototype I was going to show was this concept of a draw your own geography tool. Again, we often hear through user research that the geographies that we release our census data on doesn't always match people's understanding of their areas, or there are other types of areas that that would be useful at times. The one that I think is quite commonly cited would be things like school catchment areas. So a little demo of this tool. Each of these polygons that you can see on the screen is an output area. If I start drawing a polygon around which the area that I consider to be, this is Southampton in Hampshire. This is what I think Southampton is. I don't care about the official definition. You see I've drawn a polygon. It's selecting all of the output areas that fall within that polygon. From that, this is very basic at this stage, and we're kind of thinking about how this interacts with other products like area profiles. We can click that. It's returning a call to an API and returning the data for that area that we've selected. It might be that we don't have the kind of the profile in this tool in the very end. It might be that we kind of link off either to an area profile or something like the build your own table journey that Callum and Keith showed earlier, with these kind of areas pre-selected as for the geographies of interest. Definitely kind of further thought to do here about how that does integrate into our products. This is a very early prototype as well of a sub-population profile explorer. This is built off of the build your own table functionality demoed earlier. And the idea here is that we can kind of create a variety of different combinations of variables. Say I was a policymaker interested in males who are of working age, of Indian ethnicity. I wanted to perhaps understand how life outcomes for that group compared against the overall population. You can see as I make selections, it's querying the data live and generating these charts. The kind of the top stacked bar charts compare against the overall population, and we can see how this group compares. You can kind of imagine scenarios like the pandemic more recently, where there are particular subgroups that need to be targeted through certain policies, and so the idea of having maps that kind of support where these population groups are spatially located could be really useful. So the example I think that been using recently would be things of there's been some vaccine hesitancy in certain largely for males, I think, in certain ethnic groups. This would be kind of a way of exploring that data. The last prototype I wanted to show today was one of our more explanatory formats, and this is something we're kind of calling scrollytelling, and it also combines the idea that we sometimes in the past as ONS have restricted ourselves to national level narratives, whereas many users are interested in what is happening in their area and how they compare to the national picture. So this is something we put out a few months ago. It was exploring some non-census data around local income deprivation, but a really interesting concept where a user is invited to select their area or an area of interest to them initially, and then the story is put into the context of that area. So here I've selected Eastleigh, and it kind of shows me where kind of Eastleigh is ranked in the overall distribution, and then the story begins to unfold and talks about those neighbourhoods within Eastleigh, so kind of combining this very small area geography analysis. But then as we go on, we zoom out to put that into a wider context and see how that picture in Eastleigh compares against some of the national trends that we were seeing. Again, a kind of very visual way of showing this, and a lot of our analysis will be area based. And if you put yourself in the kind of the shoes of a user, kind of traditionally our analysis would be blocks of text followed by charts, and people have to kind of match the two together. This is a kind of way of having both in view at the same time and guiding people through what they are seeing in the visuals, which can be particularly powerful when you've got quite complicated concepts like income deprivation to guide people through. I'm going to stop demoing now because I think we are kind of nearing the end of our time on this session. Yeah, like I say, feedback is very welcome. Interested in any questions that anyone has at the end of the session, and yeah, feel free to play with the links that are in the presentation and yeah, share the feedback. Callum.
Thanks, Rob. Do the other presenters want to kind of join on virtual screen as well, just so we can go through any questions with the audience? Welcome back all. So yeah, thanks everyone for your parts in the presentation. So we've got at least one question on Slido, so we'll do that one first. So thanks, Celia, for that. So the question is there a secondary analysis program being considered by ESRC? So Ed, are you okay just to respond to that?
I'll do my best to answer that. There will undoubtedly be something. There always is. I am not sure exactly of the details of what's being planned at the moment by the academics. The one sort of conversation I've been having already, I won't say with who, but there's a huge amount of interest in particularly the geographies of ethnicity as well. So I know of at least one bit that's being prepared in that sort of realm. I can't say much more than that, as it's not a submitted bid yet, but I know there's particular interest in that sort of area, but no doubt there'll be others as well. And when we do this analytical program, we're very keen to work with academics to both to sort of inform us how we sort of should be writing it, but also if there are any academics that want to work in kind of partnership to produce some of these these articles, we're interested in speaking to them as well. So do get in touch if that's of interest to you. But no, I don't intimately know the big sort of projects being planned by ESRC or others.
Okay, thanks, Ed. And yeah, just kind of echo that really in terms of, I think we're keen, aren't we, that, as much use is made of the data in all sorts of ways, analysis programs and so on. So yeah, we're just encouraging that everywhere that we can. And yeah, so yeah, we look forward to those sorts of things happening. So that was it, I think, in terms of questions on Slido. So I don't know whether we haven't got a huge audience live with us. So if people had other questions, then I'm more than happy for people to put them in the chat, or even if to raise a hand if people wanted to. Celia.
Sorry, I put another question in another Slido number for some reason. Sorry. Anyway, it was for Rob, actually. I just wondered how you kind of decide how much investment ONS put into the products and how much you leave the private sector to kind of develop things, or academics. Obviously a lot of these things look like they're kind of moving forward from products that have appeared before. So I was just really wondered how you make that judgment.
Really interesting question. I'm not sure that's a judgment that we wholly kind of actively consider too much. I think we're certainly trying to level up access, I think, to content like this. I think it's some of the widest use that we see through interfaces like this are through use by others. Whether that's kind of the media or academia. So there is something about the value that a central body doing this rather than lots of teams repeating the same sort of activities across the private sector. Yeah, and I think there's definitely something around. We see this in there are kind of various teams across the media in particular who have dedicated, say, data journalism teams who would be doing some of the formats that we've kind of shown today. But then there's a whole swathe of outlets who don't have that kind of that luxury, perhaps. Perhaps on a very personal level, but I think this is kind of a view kind of shared by ONS as well. It's about making sure kind of no one is left behind. That's kind of in line with the GSS strategy, and it's it's making sure that those who are perhaps reading content through ONS content through outlets, I don't know, let's say kind of the Mirror, the Sun, the Daily Mail, perhaps those teams that wouldn't have that kind of on-hand expertise, that they are getting kind of a good experience. They're getting content that can work for their audiences as well.
No, thanks. That's great. Yeah, it's great to see that this richness of the output. So thanks very much.
Good. Thanks. Good question. Any other questions from any of the audience? So feel free to raise a hand or just try and keep an eye on too many things. If I'm honest with you, try and keep an eye on slide at the same time as well. Oh, I've got another one. So have you discussed any ethical issues with anyone being able to geographically identify clusters of subgroups within the population? Shall I repeat that? I guess I might go to Keith first, if that's all right. And then, so have we discussed any ethical issues with anyone being able to geographically identify clusters of subgroups within the population?
I have to say that no. I suppose our our concentration is protecting the individual and the household. There are groups of individuals. I seem to remember the last census there was a group of 29 people who were born in Zimbabwe in one output area. I just always remember that, and nobody else for miles around. But no, we haven't looked at that.
Yeah, do you want me to? I see Kevin's got a hand up, but I guess just to throw in, I guess my thoughts. It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because quite a lot of what we're trying to achieve is to identify those clusters in the population for good reason, in terms of, you know, provision of services and planning and so on. So on the one hand, identifying those clusters is really important, but then there is the reverse side, I guess, in terms of you know, disclosure, if you like, and any concerns, I guess, if those clusters of the population be identified. So it is a kind of really careful balance. Yeah, I think, you know, more generally, I guess, around the census and the whole ethics of it and so on, you know, that goes through a pretty robust process in terms of white papers and legal process, and, you know, representations from many stakeholder groups that kind of represent some of the sort of clusters that we might be talking about. And, you know, so generally their input is to want that information, to understand some of those subpopulations in more detail.
Yeah, there's a balance. I remember when the ethnic group question was and the religion questions were coming in, there was a very difficult distinction between recognition without identification. You know, some people want their groups really to be recognised. Yes, we've got 30 of this group in this area because that means that we're recognised and we get some funding or something. But at the same time, it's there are others who just don't want that information to get out there. It's quite a difficult balance.
Yeah,
I don't know if the question was motivated by one of the prototypes I show, but it's definitely something that we've been talking about and has come up before when we've demoed this elsewhere. That I think that there's perhaps a distinction, isn't there, in a way, between the build your own table interface where people are retrieving spreadsheets of data to sort of then, you know, to use in an onward use, where, you know, compared to something like the visualization tool I kind of showed earlier, where it does make it a little bit more visual and easier for people to explore. And I guess you conclude probably widening your user base with a tool like that because of its ease of use. So I think that's something we do need to keep an eye on as we kind of do further user research and prototype, take that prototype further.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Hopefully that answered the question to whoever asked it. I did see a hand was raised partway through, so more than happy. Yes, so Catherine, I don't know if you wanted to.
Hi, can you actually hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I didn't know if I even had a mic on this one. No, that was my question. I hadn't been able to find my button, so I asked it on the Slido. I was thinking, really, you have answered my question. You know, so would that visualization be available, you know, publicly available, or would that just be limited to certain organizations that, you know, are able to justify their use of it?
I think the data underlying it is available to all through that build your own table interface. That, you know, that's what kind of Callum and Keith took us through in the first part of the presentations. Yeah, I think I should have said it with all of these prototypes, where some of them will be probably more further advanced come the time that the census data is released. Some will be more, I don't know, what we might describe as like alpha kind of still in a kind of a prototype stage. And like I say, would need to kind of review as the prototype unfolds as to whether, you know, public opinion around something like this, and what any ethical considerations we need to focus on.
Well, the reason, I'll explain why. When I first saw that tool, the first thing that occurred to me was, if you were looking to buy a house, or if you're looking to where to move to, and you had a map like that, I sort of started thinking of all the possibilities of how you would what information you'd look for, and then I just sort of stopped because I felt a little bit uncomfortable with where my imagination was going. How like estate agents and individuals and people looking for good children. And I was thinking, I just wondered if that could start encouraging some areas to be avoided and other areas to be sought after, and actually kind of shift the way people look for new places to live and where to send their children to school. But yeah, and then I thought, God, there's a lot more possibilities there, but I don't want to think about that.
There are lots of positive opportunities, I would imagine as well. There are so many scenarios that I was thinking through where this data could be of so much use, and there's a barrier, I think, even for kind of established policymakers to kind of access this data and then actively make use of it. So it is I mean, there'd probably be really positive uses, I'd imagine, for the general as well. And it is a hard one to balance. I mean, fundamentals for me is that the data is available. It's to anybody. We're using the same system that powers the build your own table interface. But yeah, I do appreciate that the tool is designed to make it easier for people to access and understand.
Yeah, I think we're providing the information, if you like. I guess the motivations of how it's used is something obviously we can't control. It reminded me of something a little bit in terms of, we used to have a system called Neighbourhood Statistics, which was particularly focused on deprivation. So you could quickly see which were the most deprived areas at really small geographies, and that was that was used in some ways, I think, in case people thinking about where to move to. But that was that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you can view it in terms of, perhaps I don't want to live there because it looks quite deprived, or I might want to move there because I can get a house cheap and it's going to get lots of funding in terms of neighbourhood renewal. So there's all sorts of always different kind of motivations and balances, I think. Okay, it was really good question there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So I think in terms of questions, I'll just a final check on Slido. I don't think there's anything else there. So we'll just move on, if that's okay, from the questions to, just kind of closing remarks, really, which I just hopefully, today's been useful and has helped to kind of bring to life a little bit in terms of what our thoughts and plans are around 21 census outputs. And hopefully, we've got a grasp that, those outputs and products will vary quite a lot based on the different users and uses, and some of the ideas we've got there, which you'll have seen. So hopefully that kind of was useful and made sense. Just to, let you know about a few things if you're not already aware. I think Ed mentioned this in his session. So we've got a live outputs consultation at the moment. So we're kind of outlining our proposals. We're very, very interested in feedback. So they are proposals which we imagine we will amend and change based on people's feedback. So that includes, things around the release schedule that Ed showed. And then we take that. So the closing date for that is midnight on the 5th of October. And then we take all that information. We're hoping for a lot of feedback, and we review that, and we kind of make informed decisions based on that feedback to produce ultimately what we're referring to as a census outputs prospectus, which is almost like an update of what we put out in the consultation, but saying, okay, we proposed something, you commented, this is now where we're at, if you like, in terms of things like a release schedule and the products that we plan to produce from the census. So that's due in February, and then very, very shortly after that we'll be into that release window of these outputs being made available publicly to users. So although 2022 sounds a long way away, it's not that far away. I think time always seems to get faster as you get older, so I expect that's going to come across us very soon. So those things are coming up. In terms of keeping in touch, if you're interested in kind of knowing what's happening and getting on mailing lists and so on, so you can subscribe to Census, if you like, through Gov Delivery. There's a link there to the system within ONS where you can subscribe and say, I'm interested in census or economic stats or health or both. And then for more information, there's a link to our web pages. there as well. The other thing really encourage is that we showed some prototypes today. We use those as part of a user research to get input from users, not only in terms of how useful that product might be, but in terms of the interaction as to how easy it is, how it fits with the tasks that users have to do. So we're continuing to carry out user research. So always looking for volunteers to be involved in that. And there's an email address there, censusoutputs@ons.gov.uk to do that. So very much encourage people to do that. And I think just sorry, a minute over time. Just to thank a few people. So thanks to the audience first and foremost for joining us today and listening and asking some really good questions, and for the audience, which we hope will happen in terms of when this is shared with people who've attended the conference in person. Thank you to the speakers for giving up their time and for going through and presenting today. And lastly, in terms of for the RSS, in terms of the conference organisers for kind of making all this happen. So just say thank you very much. And that's it. Last slide. So that's us for today. So yeah, I wish everyone well and enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you very much.